Hello and welcome. This presentation is the extended version of the presentation I gave at the European Association of Social Anthropologists at Stockholm University this past August. It's called Understanding the Rise of the 21st Century Flat Earth Movement from a Bundle of Popular Conspiracy Theories and Science Skepticism. So my objectives are to understand the modern Flat Earth movement from the inside, engaging personally some of its key proponents. And I'm working towards a study of epistemological transformations, that is, how people shift their ways of thinking, being, and feeling. I'm following Gregory Bateson's discussion in Mind and Nature, Necessary Unity, especially the question of tautologies and abductions. And I'm also testing my own paradigm, which is called creative critical reflexivity, and the theory of epistemological resonance, which applies concepts such as concordance and discordance to look at epistemological harmonics, and how discordance leads to a creative resolution that we can look at as growth and transformation. Epistemology here is simply a way of being and knowing. Everyone has their own way of thinking and knowing, unless they follow a particular orthodoxy and authority as telling them how to think. And in anthropology, we have deconstructed this for a long time. The experiences and narratives of flat earth proponents are prime examples of epistemological transformations and their social and personal consequences. Like Bateson, I am concerned with changes in basic epistemology, character, self, and so on. I'm quoting him here from 1979, page 143. In a nutshell, tautologies are collections of linked concepts or vocabularies that we use to produce logical explanations. We engage in what Charles Sanders Peirce called abduction when we flesh out explanations that ensure the validity of the links in the tautology so that this logic seems self-evident, again following Bateson. Epistemological transformations are interesting because they involve shifting our whole system of abductions, as Bateson put it. We face the threat of chaos when we challenge our own assumptions and preconceptions. This is what I call a state of epistemological discordance that may lead to epistemological growth and transformation. And again, epistemological means simply way of being, and resonance is the think-feel vibration that everyone has. So my idea is that as we live and try to understand the world, we're vibrating in ways that reflect how we think. So this resonance is like a singing, a tone, is the sounds of our souls when they meet and engage. To engage in an abduction is to describe some event or thing and then look around the world for other cases to fit the same rules that we devise for our description. This is why it is particularly prone to deception, because you have a way of thinking about the world that you haven't analyzed critically or reflexively, and you go around finding phenomena that fit your description. So why am I looking at the flat earth? The flat earth has had incredible growth in popular interest, and this is a graphic from 2010 to 2018 from Google Trends, comparing flat earth with anthropology on YouTube. And here we see that anthropology barely exists in contrast with flat earth on YouTube since the flat earth started booming in 2015. This graph from Google Trends shows web searches worldwide. And here I'm comparing flat earth, ethnography, social and cultural anthropology. The colors are on top. You can see flat earth is blue. From 2004, when these data started being collected, it was between cultural and social anthropology somehow. And then in 2015, 2016, flat earth just basically boomed. And this is worldwide web searches. And the red shows ethnography as a field of study, and how it has been on the decline, sort of a steady decline, you can tell. So it is a popular phenomenon that we should be looking into. as anthropologists interested in all social phenomena. This is a pretty big one. Now, my methodology. So far I recorded 20 conversations with over 38 hours. I was in Portugal and Brazil when I talked to people who are in the United States of America, Canada, United Kingdom, Spain, and Nepal. Some of the obstacles for studying the flat earth phenomenon and the movement are, that there are millions of videos, pro and con. And so I decided to do this on a face-to-face online approach through Skype and Google Hangouts. Many people were not up for talking, and I had to prove that I understood their line of thinking before they accepted me and talked to me. For gaining access to my participants, I had to pledge never to misrepresent or pathologize their positions. This is absolutely key. It's a part of very important anthropological ethnographic ethics that I follow. Initially, this resistance to conversations is due to the attacks that they receive on a daily basis by people who disagree with them. Here are some examples of emotional attacks, hate speech, and marginalization that flat earth proponents face in their public channels. It's particularly coarse type of language. So there's a lot of tension and friction and reactionary emotional responses from outside the movement and within the flat earth movement as well. People get very emotional with this information. It is a test for our open-mindedness as anthropologists seeking to understand how people think, to really step back from all these emotions and try to understand how people change their minds, which is my approach, and how do they feel after this transformation. They characterize globe believers as basically brainwashed science fiction lovers who are having a Santa Claus, Easter Bunny is not real kind of moment. They also call this a cognitive dissonance reaction. They're faced with information that they don't want to process, and then they lose it and start calling people names, and they would not be able to step back and reflect, to analyze things with an open mind. Flat earthers question NASA, most importantly, and they're skeptical of everything or anything that NASA does, because the idea is that once you're caught lying, you cannot be trusted. They believe that they have caught NASA lying in many instances. This meme is from ODD TV. I unfortunately did not have a chance to talk to him. It's an interesting example of the art that's coming out from the Flat Earth movement. And there's also music and other things. This is from a meme book by the Flat Earth podcast called Hoax. And this is one of the things that many flat earthers say, is that condemnation before investigation is your admission to indoctrination. Here are some of the participants in my research, people that I spoke to extensively, up to 5-6 hours. Some of them I spoke to only 2 hours. Here you can see the need to remain prolific and engage. Like, for example, Jeranism has 324 original videos. I think probably some that are mirrored. Mark Sargent has 1,200 videos, and many of them are mirrored, but he's very active. You see that they have a lot of views collectively. So, also, Mark Sargent told me that when he was in California, he was invited to the house of the main star of the sitcom to discuss Flat Earth. He indicates that it is going mainstream, and there's a lot of people who are considered in the closet flat earthers. A number of my research participants are also radio hosts at Truth Frequency Radio, which is an internet-based radio. So Jeranism is based in California. He's a bookseller and former drugstore manager. Celebrate Truth is by Robbie Davidson, who's the creator of the Flat Earth International Conference. I only spoke to 4 Christians, and Robbie Davidson is one of them. Mark Sargent is a computer geek, I guess you can say, and a Flat Earth freshman recruiter, as he put it. And Globebusters is a fairly popular channel by Bob Noto, an amateur pilot, expert at setting up satellite radio systems. And Mike Helmick is a former Christian pastor, video game designer, and programmer. Endeavor Freedom is one of Zen Garcia's channels. He has an Apache heritage, and He went on a vision quest, and he is an unconventional Christian that looks into many different ancient texts, which he discusses online. And some of my conversations with Zen are online in his channel, Endeavor Freedom. Paul on the Plane does not reveal his full name. This is a reaction a lot of people in the Flat Earth have to protect their families, to protect their work. And he's also a radio host, and his series of videos focuses on faking space. Wakey Wakey is Mark Knight's channel. He's a British and lives off the grid in Spain and invests in cryptocurrencies. He's now working on an alternative education system for children that values one's sense of perception and intuition. And DITRH stands for Deep Inside the Rabbit Hole, and it is David Weiss's channel. Mike Helmick introduced me to David, and David introduced me to others. David is a businessman based in New Jersey, an enthusiastic Flat Earth proponent who sees the growth of the movement as an awakening. He's one of the hosts of the Flat Earth podcast, which now has over 120 episodes. Your Curveless Earth is Nathan Roberts' channel. He's a Christian. He's a son of missionaries to Melanesia and Guam, and a father of 5 children. The entire conversation I had with Nathan was posted on his channel, which is part of my approach to ethics. If anybody wants to have my conversation for their own use, they should. And he asked for it, so he posted immediately on his channel. And he tells me that Flat Earth almost cost him his marriage, but that his wife eventually converted after praying and asking for a revelation. Flat Earth Universe is Martin Kenny's channel. He's a UK-based researcher who focuses on what he calls the science of syncretism, that is, looking at every cosmological system in order to synthesize their teachings and relationships. Kenny does not believe that the Bible provides the ultimate truth, but he also draws on the Bible for information. So he's looking at all kinds of systems and trying to boil them down into something that he finds agreeable. And he has been on mainstream TV in the UK discussing various different issues. The last time was about the lunar landing hoax. Finally, Karen B. is a graphic designer, single mother, who lives in the central USA and is part of a research group, FE Core, which also involves Jaron, Bob Nodo, Mike Helmick, and formerly another participant, Chris Monk, who does not have an active YouTube channel and whose position has caused a lot of controversy and drama recently, which is not something I can get into in this presentation. And another person I talked to was introduced to me by Paul on the Plane. His name is Steve Bruce Bokan. He is a Hungarian descended Australian helicopter pilot and flight instructor based in China who happened to have been in Nepal when we spoke. And he's a born-again vegan. He does not have an active channel. Flat Earthers, once they go public with their beliefs, they face this universal experience of prejudice and marginalization for taking their stance. It reminds me of Foucault's fearless speech, the idea of parésia, which is taking a social risk, speaking the truth in public. It has to do with high social costs to support Flat Earth information in public. So one may experience marriage problems. Some claim that they can only date a Flat Earther. There's threats to jobs. Some people have reportedly lost their job after people who were against the Flat Earth contacted their employer, told them that this person was a Flat Earther. Person lost their job. People don't reveal their actual names. Robbie Davidson reported being expelled from multiple churches. Then we have the phenomenon of closeted Flat Earthers. And all of them agree that when you Google Flat Earth, you're going to go straight into a website called the Flat Earth Society. They all believe this is controlled opposition. So if you think of the USSR and the KGB or governments that control information, China, for example, where you cannot have opposition, all you do is that you pretend to have an opposition and you infiltrate the so-called opposition and you keep it controlled. You may also take a look at Pierre Bourdieu's book on television, where he talks about this, television debates, how they're totally controlled and don't ever go deep into the information. This is a really good source for this. In this very short book, Bourdieu said because otherwise journalists would not read it because they're lazy, apparently. So Now, there's a history in anthropology of taking seriously alternative cosmologies. So in Hugh Brody's book, Maps and Dreams, indigenous hunters dream of animals that they will later hunt.
Their spirits would travel out of their bodies in the night and go onto the land and find the animals. They would dream the hunt.
UBC professor Bruce Miller received a visit from tribal ancestors in a dream that solved a land claims litigation case. You can read that in Extraordinary Anthropology. It's Bruce's edited volume alongside Jean-Guy Goulet. Professor Paul Nadasdy from Cornell, working among Cree hunters, also experienced a maimed rabbit giving itself to him as a gift after being half trapped in Paul's trap. So Paul set up a trap. The rabbit came into the trap, got hurt, managed to escape, and then he was trying to enter Paul's cabin and seemed to beg Paul to break its neck and take it. This is part of the cosmology of the Cree. The animals give themselves up to the hunter. Animals are not animals, they're persons. So they resist this language of managing and the practice of managing natural resources because these are people.
Despite the ancient origin of these laws, animals continue to enforce them. They also continue to communicate with human people by speaking to them in dreams, visions, and the occasional waking encounter. Also, importantly, animals play an ongoing role in the political education of First Nation people by cultivating in them attitudes and interpersonal skills that they'll need if they're to assume their roles as fully competent adult members of a society that includes both humans and animal people.
And also in the work of Julie Cruikshank, Do Glaciers Listen, we see the idea that geological features are alive and responsive, and that is taken seriously. And also, we know that in anthropology, Franz Boas did a lot of work against the scientism of his time, which was eugenics, racialized-based science, and he did so actually doing empirical research. And he was against all these evolutionary rationalities, which led in the United States to segregation, to the rise of the Nazi in Germany, the idea of a master race. And also, we shouldn't forget the Tuskegee experiment, in which the United States government funded doctors to keep poor black Americans with syphilis so they could watch them die until the 70s. And then Clinton issued an apology. Right? So we know that science without reflexivity and without morality is very, very dangerous. So there are other precedents for taking seriously the flat earth, and this is the notion of the counterintuitive globe that Professor Tim Ingold looked into in his book Being Alive, Essays on Movement, Knowledge, and Description. So he says that to grasp such a counterintuitive understanding that the earth is round like a ball and that people can live anywhere without falling off calls, it is argued, for nothing less than a complete conceptual restructuring of the child's mind, comparable to a paradigm shift in the history of science. Here he is referring to the idea that Galileo and Copernicus actually changed with their observations the whole narrative of mainstream science. Of course, we have to at least be slightly skeptical of the kinds of technologies they have at that time, because we have binoculars that are stronger than the telescopes that these guys were using, right? And yet we think that they really cracked some massive cosmological problem. And this is another question, but we can go back to later in another presentation. Ingold also says that he cannot relate to the globe as an environment, because whereas the globe is measured and recorded, the environment is experienced. Following Gibson, Ingold says that the life world is spherical from the perspective of the inhabitant's core, which is different from the world divorced from life that is imagined in the form of a globe, as we are taught it exists, and that can apparently only be witnessed by leaving it. Ingold argues that whereas a global perspective is afforded to a being outside of the world and is seen to be both real and total, a local perspective afforded to beings in the world is regarded as illusory and incomplete. So he's saying that through our senses, phenomenologically, we can only experience being in the world and not outside of it, as the globe kind of proposes as a total final explanation. Also, He notes that Immanuel Kant would admit that to his senses the earth appears to be flat. James Gibson, who was an environmental psychologist, for him, an inhabitant is not on the outer surface of a solid sphere, but at the core of an unbounded spherical field comprised of the sky above and the earth below. So in the globe model, the relation between people and the world seems to be turned inside out for Ingold. Also, Martin Heidegger, as Ingold points out, repudiated the out-of-earth technology. These pictures are coming from outside of the earth that flat earthers believe is fake. But we should point out that Tim Ingold, on Perception of the Environment, in page 212, points out that he's not some latter-day flat earther or pre-Copernican. So we should just keep that in mind. Ingold read a paper by Wozniacki and Brewer from 1992, and this sparked a discussion regarding children's conception of the earth and their indoctrination into a different and unprovable through the senses model, which is the globe model. So Ingold says that children are congratulated for agreeing with what was supposed to be the scientifically correct view, which is that, contrary to intuition, people actually live all around the outside of a spherical earth. Again, this is from Hoax by the Flat Earth Podcast. This is a free book. It has a bunch of memes from flat earthers. And here they're just saying, well, look, you go up 100,000 feet and you cannot tell that there's a curvature, but you're supposed to believe that you are on a ball. This is the article that Ingold read from Cognitive Psychology, Mental Models of the Earth, a Study of Conceptual Change in Childhood by Stella Wozniacki and William Brewer. And here they're saying, they're abstract, the synthetic models, such as the hollow sphere or the flattened sphere, are generated by children as a solution to the problems arising from the inconsistency between the initial model of a flat earth and the culturally accepted scientific model of a spherical earth. So what's happening here is that children are going to school, they believe the world is what they see, what they feel, which is flat, stationary, but the teachers are telling them it isn't. There's people upside down in Australia, and as they get convinced by the teachers without any physical, personal, experientiable evidence, they create different models like a hollow sphere or a flattened sphere. They come to understand that the Earth is a sphere only when the presuppositions that gave rise to their initial models have been reinterpreted. That's what Wozniacki and Brewer say, and this is a large paper. It's about 50 pages. In Anthropological Studies of Shamanism, this I'm referring to a book by Mircea Eliade, where he cites Knud Rasmussen's book from 1929, describing this phenomenon of the mystical light, night and distant vision. It is as if the house in which the shaman is suddenly rises. He sees far ahead of him through mountains, exactly as if the earth were one great plain, and his eyes could reach to the end of the earth. So, in shamanic experience, Eliade's book is a great example of this. You don't have a globe earth, you don't have a ball earth, you don't have a spinning ball earth. You have something completely different. You have the tree of life in the center, you have planes of existence, and it is a very complex book. It's a large book. It is outdated because it's from the late 50s, but it's still quite a source of information. Some of it's repetitive, but it is an incredible effort by Mircea Eliade, who actually lived here where I am in Portugal. Now, flat earth proponents, they evoke the idea of common senses to mean human sense perception and link reality to direct experience. They oppose the common sense of scientism, which is conformity to the pronouncements of self-prescribed scientific authorities, in particular theoretical physicists, astronomers, and NASA. For them, questioning science and making experiments is more scientific than accepting science textbook facts at face value. Michael Herzfeld, the anthropologist, also looked at common sense, and he argues that anthropologists are looking at different kinds of common sense from all around the world. But these common senses, if you will, are culturally based, they're linguistically expressed, they're kind of like the tautologies that I talked about in the working of abductions, if you remember in the beginning of the presentation. And the flat earth common sense is incompatible with what Herzfeld calls the evolutionary assumptions of the Victorian epistemology that is held to be common sense in much of the Western world today. So there's this reflexive move in flat earth thinking. That they have to look back how you learn what you learn, how you know what you know, and start questioning those presuppositions. This is very reflexive, anthropologically speaking. That's why it makes it quite interesting as a way of thinking. So they will tell you that the reason you cannot tell the Earth is spinning, it is because it's not spinning. This is, again, appealing to the senses. There's a child with a ball. It's a very interesting meme, very evocative. It's part of the kind of art that's been spawned by the Flat Earth movement since 2015 and continues to grow. They will tell you that they're conducting laser gyroscope tests, and they look at the Michelson-Morley experiment and Airy's failure experiment, supposedly prove that the Earth is not spinning. Mainstream scientists would say otherwise. They have a different explanation for it. And again, if you don't do the experiment yourself, you cannot have your own conclusion. Now, what you're seeing here is a time-lapse photography of a rocket launch, and most, if not all, flat earthers do not believe that rockets are going into space. This photo is not by a flat earther, it's by somebody who documents rocket launches. And here you see that the rocket's doing a trajectory going down, still in view. It didn't go straight up, it went in an angle and it's coming down. So this is the rocket launch trajectory curves that they say proves that these rockets are not going into space. For flat earth researchers and NASA critics, the rocket should be going up and out of view, while for NASA believers, it is the spin of the Earth that is causing the arc. Some people have looked at how children react to rocket launches, and this is the video that I'm going to show you right now. It's an edit I've made of a compilation of children and adults commenting on rocket launches that are happening in front of them. Let's take a look.
Is that a plane or is it the rocket? Was that the rocket lifting off?
Yep, that's it.
That's a noise. I've never heard it before. It's drifting. That's bad.
It's doing good so far.
Is it? Is that what always happens? Does it always go like that?
Yep.
It looks bad to me. It's in space, or is it? Is that it?
Yep, I think that's it.
Oh no, it's going down! I did. It's going down!
Peter, for Sandy, is it turning or is the Earth spinning? It's not turning, the Earth is spinning. That's going straight up, it's just the Earth is turning, we're moving away from it.
Is that what always happens? Does it always go like that?
Yep.
It looks bad to me.
And here at the very end, you see that the rocket is obviously going down. So from the child's perspective, it is going down. It's not going into space. It looks bad to me. But the adults, of course, they are saying that the Earth is spinning and causing this to happen. So flat earthers would say that if it was going into space, it should disappear from your view, going straight up, and not make a turn supposedly around the Earth. Another issue here is that this parabole here would have to be corresponding to the curvature of the Earth, and the clouds are going down in a horizon in the distance. They would have to also be respecting this curve and turning around. So these spontaneous reactions of children, and you saw it before, children basically screaming, it's going down. They see it coming down, and they say it's coming down. But the adults say, they laugh and they say, no, it's just spin of the earth. So children are very skeptical. They doubt that these rockets are going to space. They think that the rockets are falling, while the adults interpret what they see as the spin of the earth and the rocket going straight up. Now, in constructing the flat earth story, people are using personal observations and tests. They're making selective critiques of mainstream science, and they're linking various truther conspiracy narratives in different personal ways. There are various heterodox positions, so you can't just say they're all like this, or they're all stupid, or they're all... because they will tell you that they've been on the other side. They were globe believers. They were believers in space travel, hyperdrive, anything you see in Star Trek and Star Wars. And they turn around to say these are propaganda sources. Star Wars and Star Trek are there to convince you that space travel is real and to keep you trapped. And they go through a transformation which is sometimes very painful. And on the other side, they feel light and free. So you see this a lot in how they explain their transformations. All of them in my sample are pro-science and anti-scientism. I don't think there's a leader or an orthodoxy in the flat earth movement. You have at the same time religious and secular flat earth believers. Many of them believe in something spiritual, a spiritual essence. Many of them believe the earth is created. Robbie Davidson, for example, told me that he has encountered many cases of people who were atheists and then through the flat earth became spiritualized. There's one flat earth proponent, this guy called Eric Dubay, an American yoga teacher based in Thailand, and he is usually repudiated for his pro-Hitler, anti-Zionism, hollow hoax, or anti-Semite positions, and attacks on other flat earthers as shills. Shills is this language of shaming or mistrust or distrust that exists within the flat earth movement that people accuse each other of being. They say they're being paid by the government to be there and all sorts of other things that some people call paranoia, some people call twitchy. Most of the people in my sample, they do not agree with these extreme views of Eric Dubay. And some actually lamented the fact that Dubay did not keep them out of the flat earth discussion. So next I will consider a selection of converging narratives that I called in this abstract for this conference presentation, a conspiracy bundle. And later some examples and what the flat earth proponents consider to be evidence. So the conspiracy bundle. September 11, 2001, the official US government story is false. This is pretty much agreed across the board. Some people think they shouldn't be brought into the flat earth discussion because the shape of the earth has nothing to do with these other conspiracy theories necessarily, but for many flat earth proponents, one of their early awakening moments had to do with realizing that September 11, 2001, the official story was not real. They believe that the mass media is controlled. There are scholarly sources for this, Manufacturing Consent, for example, from 1988 by Edward S. Herman and Noam Chomsky, talks about editorial bias, the switch between anti-communism into the war of terror, and the buying off of all the media companies. It's a classic book. One of my participants claimed that he was working for AMAC, which is a contractor, and that AMAC were involved in fitting the World Trade Center towers with explosives. They had a contract, he says. He says that he received a threat to his family, and later he had a near-death experience and his whole life changed. This is another universal belief among flat earthers that the Apollo missions and the lunar landings were faked, that NASA is a production company, that there has been weather manipulation and geoengineering without consent from the people, and this has been in the United States Congress actually. There are so-called scientists saying that they should be spraying aerosols in the atmosphere to reflect sun rays. You can see here just the documents from the United States Congress. Many flat earthers are against the idea of aliens. They think it is something concocted by the government to keep people afraid. They also do not believe that there is an outer space in the way it's been told by, say, Carl Sagan or Neil deGrasse Tyson or Michio Kaku. They do not believe in ancient aliens, but some of them think that extraterrestrials are in lands beyond the Earth, but on the same plane as the Earth. One of my participants sent me this patent that you can find. You can just search and find it and read for yourself. You can see here on the left side, the classification is a directed energy weapon, a device that directs a beam of high energy content towards a target for incapacitating or destroying the target. It is also used for deceiving or protecting. Just kind of interesting use of doublethink. Many flat earthers believe that Dr. Judy Wood's Where Did the Towers Go? Evidence of Directed Free Energy Technology on 9/11 is a very important book. They talk about Building 7, controlled demolition, and many of them are also no-planers. This is the idea that the planes that people saw in the mass media were put there by graphics, computer graphics, 3D modeling. And they would say that the plane should have fallen outside the building. They can never have penetrated. And one particular piece of data that they show, it's from a helicopter in the distance. It zooms into the building. The plane comes in. The building explodes. And then the plane comes out the other side of the building. The nose of the plane comes out looking exactly the same as it came in. And there's people do a pixel analysis, put a pixel next to another. They grab the nose of the plane coming in and the nose of the plane coming out, and it looks exactly the same. So they're saying that the plane could not have possibly gone through the whole building like that. The steel should have destroyed the plane before it could go through the building. It's like throwing an egg on the wall and imagining that the egg's going to go through the wall. So that's kind of, in a nutshell, the no-planar position. And there's some other evidence that they show. Now, back to the conspiracy bundle. What else? There are secret societies in government, Illuminati, so-called Illuminati, and Masons, that there are Easter eggs in Hollywood films, and this is some of the most intriguing, very interesting sort of symbolic theories. The Easter egg is the idea that something is hidden, that when you find it tells you a secret. There's a recent film by Steven Spielberg in which the main theme is Easter eggs of the whole film. Rockets are going nowhere. I covered this. Von Braun was a Nazi. He was responsible for deaths of many people in a death camp where he produced a rocket that was then launched into London and Belgium. And then he was taken by the United States, promoted by Disney, and he was pardoned or forgiven because he sent humans to the moon, supposedly. Therefore, it's okay if you killed a lot of people in Nazi Germany. That is the narrative that NASA presents for children, and this is something that Jaron from Jaronism has covered, and that it is in one of my 2 videos before I made this presentation about the flat earth, the video that has Darth Vader and Noam Chomsky talking. Now, SpaceX is fake, they say, including the orbiting Tesla car. We're going to look into some of that. The Cold War was simply a 1984-style script to control the population with fear of a boogeyman. Now that has been transferred to terrorists. They were communists at the time, then they were terrorists, now North Korea, or whatever you have in the mainstream media, to keep the population afraid and dependent on the government. That's the idea. Now, there's a division in this other question, whether dinosaurs are real or a hoax, or if dinosaurs are more recent than previously thought. So some flat earthers think that dinosaurs are definitely a hoax. Others think that they were real and they cohabited with humans. And some believe the mainstream story that there were dinosaurs hundreds of millions of years ago, because that is not relevant to whether you can see the curvature on the earth, or whether or not you can see too far on ocean level or by a lake. So if you can see 50 miles away the shoreline of another place, you couldn't be on a curved sphere because that place should have been under the curvature. And this is by far the most common test that people are making in this movement. Now, to the question of Easter eggs. So as I said, it's a theory that there are clues hidden on films about various conspiracies, including 9/11 and the moon landings. One of the most important films that supposedly has these clues is Stanley Kubrick's 1980 adaptation of Stephen King's The Shining. There are several changes to the original book. For instance, there's an autobiographical element to the book that then gets transferred from Stephen King to Kubrick. So the idea here is that Stephen King is writing about himself and Kubrick was also writing about himself. And therefore he modified the novel in ways that pissed off Stephen King because Stephen King hated the film. And this is part of the thematic that appears in Steven Spielberg's film Ready Player One from this year, which points to Kubrick's adaptation of The Shining. So there's a whole scene which involves finding a clue, an Easter egg, going inside the set of The Shining and going through some of the modifications actually from The Shining that Kubrick did. So the first thing they do in the Ready Player One is go into where the typewriter is, which in Kubrick's Shining says, "All work and no play makes Jack a dull boy." That is not in the book whatsoever, in the Shining book. There's no typewriter scene, which is the most important scene in Kubrick's film. In Spielberg's film, the typewriter is spewing keys for some reason, as if pointing to the idea that the typewriter in Kubrick's film is a key for decoding something. The theory regarding the Easter eggs in Kubrick's Shining is that the typewriter that's writing the word all, A-L-L, is also writing the signal A11 as Apollo 11, because the 1 and the L looks very similar in those typewriters. So the idea is that Apollo 11 work and no play is making Jack a dull boy, and Jack is Kubrick. Just as in The Shining, Jack is Stephen. He's a former high school English teacher who's writing a play. And Stephen King has admitted to this being autobiographical. But in The Shining book, Jack is writing a play and is developing that play through the book.
How do you like it?
In Steven Spielberg's film, you also see room 237. In Stephen King's novel, there is no room 237. The room has a different number. And in Kubrick's film, of course, the boy, Danny, gets up wearing a Apollo 11 sweater and walks into this room 237, which has an anagram as well. It's Moon Room, has an N on it. You can see the tag. So it's room N, which you can make the words, you can turn it into Moon Room. 237 was the supposed distance between the Earth and the Moon at the time. Now it's been updated to 240,000 miles. Another example of an Easter egg in a Hollywood film is in the movie The Matrix from 1999, which we're going to take a look at right now, what it is. In this scene, we're going to look at Neo's passport expiry date, which only appears in the film if you're watching the film very quickly for 1 second or so. So you have to stop it, you have to flip it around and take a look at the dates to see what they are. And this is part of the theory of Easter eggs in films.
You have a social security number, you pay your taxes, and you help your landlady carry out her garbage.
Here it comes. You take a look. It is September 11th, 2001. That's the expiry date of his passport. And of course, the connection that the Easter egg theory would make is that, yeah, travel became much more difficult after the events of September 11, 2001. But this film is from 1999. So the idea here is that somebody had foreknowledge of the events of 9/11 and managed to put them inside this film. Now, in Ready Player One, this is another example of an Easter egg. In the left, you have the pentagram in the poster by the band Rush, and the numbers there, you get 33, which is 33rd degree Masonic number. The Easter eggers here would also look at the Saturn, being a cult of Saturn that seems to appear everywhere in so-called Illuminati-controlled images. And on the dartboard, you see that one shadow is falling on the 9 from the dart, and another is falling on the 11, perhaps symbolizing the two planes for 9/11. And the dartboard is similar to the United Nations symbol that's also divided in 33 parts, if you count the center. 4 times 8 plus 1, 33, which is, for many flat earthers, the map of the actual Earth, with this reef that's around it supposedly symbolizes the Antarctica, which is a place that nobody can really go nor cross, and that would be the outer limit of the flat Earth. And there's also no consensus on this. A lot of people in the flat Earth movement do not believe that the Antarctic is this barrier. Some do. It is more controversy. Here's another meme from the Hoax book by the Flat Earth Podcast, and they're saying that NASA makes these productions, seem very excited about everything they do, and people believe it because it's part of their national identity. And NASA has a budget of $50+ million per day, which is part of the motivation. And they're there to conduct this mission of nationalism and identity control. So NASA represents for Americans and space believers what the royal family does for the British. Both are myths of national identity and superiority, symbols of imperialism and exploration. The rhetoric of exploration and colonialism are intimately interlinked. NASA always talks about Columbus, how Columbus changed the world and made the world much bigger and brought civilization to America, when the reality of that story we know from anthropology is that they came and killed a lot of people and caused close to a genocide, and indigenous peoples are still suffering the consequences from that move by Columbus. So flat earthers will say that NASA is a US defense agency, which is true if you look it up. NASA is constantly promoting what is called STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math for children. NASA is continuously targeting children. And they say that other space agencies are following NASA's model for compartmentalization of information, which is called need to know, and guidance using computer-generated graphics and augmented reality. Here's another meme from Hoax by the Flat Earth Podcast, where a landscape that is supposedly in Mars looks very similar to a landscape from Greenland. And this is the idea that NASA is not going anywhere. They're not going to Mars. They're basically taking these rovers to isolated places around the Earth. Devon Island's one place, Greenland's another. And they are then processing these images, putting an orange filter on them, and pretending they're on Mars. Now, lunar landing skepticism has been booming, according to this ITV program, in which Martin Kenny, one of my participants, participated. 52% of the British do not believe the moon landings, and an astounding 73% of 25 to 34-year-olds think it was all a hoax. Russia Today reported that 57% of Russians do not believe in the moon missions. Now we're going to see why many flat earthers do not believe the moon landings. I would say most of them. You can also look at Paul on the Plains' Faking Space series to see how he constructs that case. Here, what you're seeing is the lunar lander. If you zoom it up, you can go find a photo from NASA. They're saying that if you look it up very closely, this thing couldn't possibly resist the pressures that you're supposed to be holding against in the vacuum. It seems to be not very well made or sturdy enough for resisting these pressures. And flat earthers will make a comparison with submarines and the ISS, for example, that submarines do not have components on the outside, whereas the International Space Station has astronauts going outside and turning boats. And the suits the astronauts are using are tested under the water and then taken to space, which for the flat earthers doesn't make any sense. Water, you're having external pressure, and in the vacuum of space you have the opposite. You have something sucking you out. They will tell you that the only experiment of a human in a vacuum chamber almost killed this person, made their saliva boil. So why don't they believe in the lunar landings? Here's another meme from Hoax by the Flat Earth Podcast. And they're now turning to ridiculing people who believe in NASA. And they're saying, if you're not feeling very smart, remember that your friends and family believe this trash can landed on the moon. And now I'm going to show you the Apollo 16 takeoff and what flat earthers and people who are skeptical that NASA went to the moon will point out as evidence for fakery. First, this is the raw footage that we see. Okay, here they can show you, for instance, that there's kind of a pull to the right, that there are probably 3 or more cables pulling this up, and that here there's a wink to the right. Of course, they question how, by remote control, this camera is moving up. It's another question. Now, as another view, here is to show what believed to be the wire, a nylon wire reflecting the light from the studio into a prism and being pulled so that it reveals this line here that you see. Again, it is aligned with the rise of the lunar module. It's strange because as the explosion happens in the bottom, this line is going up, and what could be going up like this? It has to be something going up. It's also coming from behind the ship. And there's another couple of lines that you can see here and here. This is one, this is another, in addition to this line that comes up here. Now, there's not only this is a problem here. These are the panels that you saw in the previous picture. And as the explosion happens, they seem to explode and start flapping. There. So this is the explosion that sends the machine up. And now the panels are flapping. Okay? Here's how it happens. You can see as many times as you want. So some people will say that this is exactly how it's supposed to happen on the moon. I mean, they haven't been on the moon, but they know for sure. It fits the equations, it fits everything. It looks very real for them. They saw it on TV. So it looks real. And flat earthers and many people who are skeptical, now the majority of people who were skeptical that these landings on the moon took place, they will tell you that these panels have been blown by the explosion in whatever this is, a model or whatever it is inside the studio. Right, so this is the kind of evidence that we're talking about. Nobody was there, but we know. Now, Elon Musk is another person that no flat earther takes seriously. Here he's being asked, what did Falcon Heavy teach you? And then later he's going to say something which seems very close to doublethink logic from 1984, straight out of 1984. He says, you can tell it's real because it looks so fake. And there's this concept in 1984, prolific feed, and feeding the proletariat, which is a newspeak term that means that there's entertainment being tossed into the masses to keep them controlled and mild and subjected to authority. And this seems to be pointing into that direction. Let's see what he says.
Falcon Heavy teach you?
Teaches, I guess, told me like crazy things can come true. Like, cause he'd said like, I didn't really think this would work.
How long will we be getting live views, do you think, from the car?
Well, I think it looks so ridiculous and impossible. And you can tell it's real because it looks so fake, honestly. Like, we'd have way better CGI if it was fake.
The idea is that it would look more real if it was fake, and that it has to be real because it looks so fake. So it is very close to doublethink logic. It is doublethink logic. I guess you can agree with this. Elon Musk is not the most eloquent spokesperson. Another thing that flat earthers will point out here is that you're seeing this rocket going down right here. But it's supposed to be going up in space. It's still visible. It is going down from the perspective of the observer. It wasn't here. Here it seemed to be going up. There's an arch. Obviously they cut this. But even in this small time, you can see it turning down. And then you get a different perspective on it. And it's definitely going down from the observer's perspective. But it's supposed to be going into space. And if you watch these launches, you're going to see that when it starts coming down and getting out of view, then you get a CGI animation that shows what the rocket's supposed to be doing. There's a realist position against these space missions and Elon Musk and SpaceX and NASA that says we have so many social problems in the world. People cannot barely have water to drink. People are starving. People are dying. And still these guys are sending cars into space. They're looking for water in Mars. But what about people here on the Earth? To finish, I'd like to say that the framework of conspiracy and pseudoscience is derogatory. These are derogatory terms. They're meant to silence critiques, dissent to orthodox positions, and interpretive diversity. Conspiracy simply means breathing together, denoting plans for action held in secret. Most capitalist companies operate this way, which is the basis for non-disclosure agreements. In antiquity, you have the great work by Cicero in Catilinam, which is about a conspiracy to kill him. And it is a genius work that actually shows how Catilina's conspiracy was discovered through census, signs that one could read in a population and one could feel. So that's a work I highly recommend in Latin from the great author Cicero, who got his head cut off and his hands cut off and sent to the Senate in Rome. Of course, those who claim for themselves the authority to ascribe to others the pseudoscience label are not reflexive nor humble regarding their own claims to objectivity and truth. Indigenous cosmologies have also received the pseudoscience label, which should make a lot of social and cultural anthropologists skeptical, but very few social and cultural anthropologists have actually had the courage or the depth of thinking to deconstruct the mainstream narrative that starts with Copernicus and Galileo and Newton. They basically accept that as part of their belief in the science apparatus, this naturalistic sort of science. Even though many of them are skeptical of Darwinian theory, because we know that eugenics and racism came out of Darwinian ways of thinking, and it still has an effect on minorities and other populations. So the final question is, how do we know what we know? Do we just know we don't know? And this is my position. I just know that I don't know, echoing Socrates' statement that we just don't know. It's this ultimate aporia. If we're not traveling into space ourselves, how can we make a claim that is actually there? Now, anthropology and scientism. As Michael Herzfeld wrote recently, scientism is a rhetoric that evokes science as its source of authority, in which paradoxically occludes recognition of its own context of production. Scientism is also linked to this language of objectivism, involves the use of scientific sounding terms and claims with effects that deflect attention away from the failure of objectivist logic. The rhetoric of numbers is employed, mathematicization, that encourages the semblance of rigid fact and a symbolism of purity. So this is part of Herzfeld's argument regarding scientism, that it uses math to pretend that math is free from values and pure. And according to Anna Grimshaw, scientism seeks accumulation of scientific knowledge that supposedly renders the world knowable. But ethnographic understanding, which is what I'm trying to do here, is a process of interrogation that disrupts conventional ways of knowing the world and involves transformations and intense moments of personal revelation. These are the motions that we're told are happening in the solar system. So the sun is going at 660,000 miles an hour in one direction. The earth is going around the sun at 66,000 miles an hour. All the planets are going, and yet the stars remain the same when you look at the stars throughout the year. So Polaris doesn't change position, even though mainstream science is telling you that it will change in 4,000 years, which none of us will be here to verify. Some people will say that NASA has pictures of the Earth from space. And this is one of the pictures, but when you look closely, you're going to see that whoever made this photo used the clone tool on Photoshop to basically copy and paste a cloud in another place. So you see the repetitions here. Unless you think that clouds in the sky repeat themselves precisely. If you think that the clouds are different in the sky when you look at them, this would not be possible. So this could only be possible as a real image from the Earth, a real photograph from the Earth, if the clouds actually repeat themselves precisely, which is not what happens. Many flat earthers believe that satellites are not real, that it's a fraud, and they will point out that the internet and other communications are carried via an extensive submarine cable system, which it is true. You can go and look it up. The internet is connected through submarine cables.
The TAT-14 system is a ring system, so if you lose one cable, you can route your traffic the other way around and still reach your end target. But also more globally, you have a number of cable routes connecting the same continents. If one cable is down, you still have several other routes.
Not satellites. Here again, flat earthers are making fun of globe believers who think that there's all these satellites in space, thousands and thousands and thousands of satellites. They would say that GPS is a positioning system, but it's not a global satellite system. It is all ground-based, based on radar and triangulation. Just good old radio. Many flat earthers are against the conventional vision of gravity. The idea here is that there are clouds up in the air, they're quite heavy, but they stay aloft, and helium goes up. It forces things to go up. Whereas in the gravity theory, the mass of the Earth should be sucking everything that's less massive towards it and not letting things like smoke and dust go up in the sky. Because the dust particle is so small, it should be attracted to the Earth. And for them, the fact that it's not points to the idea that there's an up and a down, and lightness makes you go up and heaviness makes you go down. And some of them believe in an electric universe model without the ball, because the electric universe proponents online, which is a group of scientists, they believe the universe is electrical, that the sun is electrical, which is similar to current flat earth beliefs in some circles. But the electric universe people, they believe the earth is still a sphere. And flat earthers don't agree with that, but they believe that the sun is also electrical, and that what keeps us on the ground has something to do with electromagnetism more than it does have anything to do with the spinning of the earth or gravitation. In fact, they would say that the spinning of the earth should actually be propelling you out of the earth through a centrifugal motion. that the Earth and the equator should be going at 1,000 miles an hour, which should cause all kinds of issues with even plane travel. But that doesn't happen. When you cross the equator, everything just seems the same, stays the same. Another meme from Hoax by the Flat Earth Broadcast. We don't have time for a meeting of the Flat Earth Society, as Obama said. The irony is that the UN map is a flat Earth model. And what they would say here is that politicians are bringing into their discourse the flat Earth to try to ridicule it further because it is true, not because it is fake. The idea that anything politicians are saying should be inspiring skepticism. This is the standard map of the world that many flat earthers follow. The Gleason's azimuthal equidistant map, and someday will say is the best we got. And there is a controversy within the flat earth movement about this map, whether or not it is accurate. Most of them would agree that it's obviously not accurate, is a representation. And since they have been lied to since the 1500s, since the globe started to be made to basically brainwash the population, they've been misdirected. So it's very difficult to build this model of the actual Earth we're in, given that most of the things that you're being told is a lie, for example. This is an interesting map that Mercator created out of some stories from the medieval period regarding the North Pole. And you can read his letter to John Dee. You see the 4 indrawing currents of the north and the so-called Mount Meru in the center, which you see in the Vedic cosmology. It's supposed to be a magnetic mountain. It's around this pole that the sun and the moon are turning, according to mainstream flat earth position, if there could be such a thing. What they usually point to when they look at these maps is that they think there's some truth to this, because there are some accounts of people who supposedly went north farther than we can go right now and encountered another civilization in these places, which are described in this map. If you get a high-resolution version of this map, you can see what Mercator actually wrote. There's mainstream academic papers analyzing Mercator's letter to John Dee regarding this map. And the idea here is that this information that led to this map is now hidden from us, and we think we have an ice cap that's melting. When you look at Google Earth, for example, what you see is this. That is in the North Pole. This is obviously not a photograph, because unless you think that land can be divided in those sections right there, you don't see any of the caps. So flat earthers would tell you that this is probably concocted. And this is the North Pole. You can see the coordinates in the bottom. It's 89 by 87, so pretty close to the North Pole where the cursor would be. And if you click on that little ball there in the center, it tells you that the ice caps are melting. It points you to some research regarding this. Flat earthers will tell you that there's no circumnavigation or flights that go over the North Pole and the South Pole. NASA would tell you that they have satellites that do this, but the images you get when you look at it don't look real. This doesn't look like an actual photograph. And the same is true of the South Pole. This is what you see when you go to Google Earth in the South Pole. There's a white ball and some stripes that just look computer generated. It's not a photograph. A lot of Antarctica seems to be like this, very fuzzy, and which shouldn't be the case if you had all this technology pointing to it. So that gives credence to some of the theories that people that are skeptical of mainstream science, including flat earthers, have been proposing in the last 3 or 4 years, that led to a dramatic increase in their numbers and what I call science skepticism. Nietzsche, William James, and Wittgenstein were all against scientism of their time. Very recently, in the last 4 or 5 years, there have been many works published among philosophers and theologians and anthropologists looking at scientism as a philosophy. One work I can point you to is Rachel Christie's 2018 PhD thesis that deals with Nietzsche and William James's reactions to scientism at their time. So thank you very much, and next time we're going to look at what my participants have been saying from our conversations. Conversations are sometimes very long, up to 3 hours, so I'm going to do the work of cutting them down for proper consumption. So thank you very much.